A part of me feels somewhat conflicted on this topic. On one hand, it is great because we should be working collectively together to broaden the landscape of gaming and make it easier and more accessible for people who, don't know anything about gaming to jump in and experience this exciting, amazing entertainment medium. Now, on the other hand, difficulty at times is what makes a video game enjoyable, and it's that learning curve and that experience you go through in order to learn the ins and outs of how the game requires you to play in order to progress through, that I think really gives it its identity. So what kind of inspired this topic is I heard that Death Stranding, the upcoming game from Kojima, was going to have a very easy difficulty mode. And this difficulty mode was created with the idea that people who aren't typically gamers could go ahead and experience this game. And I think they did a test where some guy couldn't complete the first level of Pac-Man, and they gave him basically this game to test it on very easy mode, and he was able to actually play the game and, enjoy the experience. And so when I was reading this, you obviously get very mixed feelings on this. Like, oh, why even play the game then if you're not even going to have a challenge for yourself to overcome? When some people feel that this is destroying what basically gives a game its identity, And I'm sort of somewhere stuck in the middle here. I think it's great that, and I do think that it's very important for us to collectively come together and sit here and say, hey, listen, as gaming grows and it becomes more popular, we have to make it more accessible for people who aren't used to holding a controller in their hands to be able to sit down and experience a video game. And on the other hand, it's like, okay, but what about in the case of games like Sekiro and any of the From Software type of games where really difficulty is what gives those games their identities? And I think collectively we all have to work together to just come to a realization, that gaming, as it grows and as it continues to grow, and, it's already technically the most dominant entertainment medium out there, right? But as it becomes more socially acceptable for people and we get people who don't typically play video games start to pick up a controller and really enjoy their experience, we have to give them the ability to sit there and not feel as intimidated and not feel like they're sitting here sort of, hitting a stone wall with no progress. Because that's one of the more frustrating elements of gaming, right? When you feel like, oh, I just invested 2-3 hours of my time, but I didn't go anywhere. And I feel like this sort of intimidation effort is what a lot of people stay away from, like the type of From Software games that they make, because those are the games that require you to sort of really analyze the gameplay and work around the parameters that they've built. And, a part of that I truly believe gives the game its identity, right? And whenever, this is kind of interesting because this topic came up again in a more controversial statement when someone was saying that Sekiro Shadows Die Twice should have an easy mode or a normal mode or whatever. It should have difficulty options so that people could actually play the game who want to play the game. But my response to that is simply put, but the difficulty is what gives the game its identity. So by stripping away the difficulty, what you're effectively doing is stripping away the intent of the developers, which is to have you sit there and progressively get better at the game through trial and error to the point where you can really fend for yourself, And I really love Sekiro Shadows Die Twice, but I already went in and I experienced Bloodborne. I remember when I played Bloodborne for the first time, it was my first From Software game I ever experienced, right? And I was very nervous going into it, and I only bought Bloodborne because of the hype surrounding it, that all the reviews, people saying it's fantastic. I had really no interest in the game from the get-go, but when I purchased that game and I played it, I was incredibly surprised because I played it very conservatively, right? I took my time, I was slow, and you can even see in the initial gameplay I did for that game, I was afraid to even attack enemies, because I've heard so much about, games from this developer and the series that this game succeeded. And I was all like, oh, geez, this game's going to be nearly impossible, and that was my mindset going into it. But what I ultimately found is it turned out to be one of my favorite games this generation. And I don't know what it was, because typically I love story-based games, and anything that From Software does is very minimalist in terms of its showcase of it telling a story, right? But it really excels at the gameplay. And for whatever reason, when I continued to play Bloodborne, I just fell in love with it every single moment as I progressively got better at the game. And the same thing is sort of for Sekiro: Shadows Die Twice. I actually really enjoyed that game. Actually, I enjoyed that game more than I enjoyed Dark Souls 3, at least the core gameplay of that game, even though it was very different. And that's a very, very hard game. I would say that's even more difficult than Bloodborne and Dark Souls 3, right? And because it requires such precise timing, but that is a game that I sat down and I learned. And part of my journey and my experience of that game was getting through those difficult boss battles and fights and learning to become better at the game. And that really gives the game its identity. It's like, gosh, I remember the last boss. I spent literally 2 days, probably a collective 4 to 5 hours on that boss, right? Me just trying to beat the last boss of the game, right? But when I finally beat him, it was the most satisfying feeling in the world. And I think that it's that, that feeling that you get when it's like, you put your time and effort into something, and when you finally accomplish it after, learning the patterns and just really, if you want to say lucking out, whatever, that feeling alone makes the experience so worth it, because it's something that no other game can really give me. It's why I keep going back to those From Software games. It's just they provide me with a feeling of accomplishment that no other game really does, And I disagree with that whole statement of, oh, we should have a difficulty settings in those games because I don't have the time to sit there and do it. But you're stripping away what makes the game at its core interesting and engaging to play. The difficulty is what gives the game its identity, And yeah, it's unfortunate, that I can already tell, and my time, although is balanced right now, I don't nearly have as much time as I did when I was a kid, and yeah, it takes me so much longer to beat these games, but I wouldn't have it any other way. I wouldn't want the developers to purposely change an experience if it wasn't intended by them in order to make the game more accessible to me. That's not fair, because what I prefer is to have whatever the experience is recommended by the developers, and when I played Alien Isolation back in 2014, the hardest difficulty of the game, it said right there in the text that this is the way that Alien Isolation is meant to be played. And I played it on that difficulty, and it wasn't impossible. It just required a lot of patience, and you really had to watch out. And it gave the game an identity for me. It increased that fear factor, and it made it so much more engaging. At the same time, though, I look at video games and how far that they've come in terms of storytelling, and I know that the Tokyo Game Show is currently going on that I'm recording this, and they just released like a new cutscene for Death Stranding and some gameplay, right? And I'm watching this cutscene that they released, and the acting, the performances, the voice acting on top of that, and then the facial animations and the graphics and the directing and everything, it's all like high production value stuff. And a part of that is it's very interesting from like a non-gamer's perspective. My parents, I remember when I was a teenager, it was like, oh, gaming, whatever. It was definitely something that they thought for kids, right? But as I got older, and as gaming has also progressed along with me maturing, and me being into it and a fan of it as much as I am now, my parents also saw that alongside with me. And so whenever there's like a new game trailer, if it's something interesting that maybe I liked on YouTube or I shared on my social media, they'll check it out and they'll be like, wow, that looks really, really incredible, And so I look at this aspect, right? This divide of two people, one being myself, who's grown up with the technology, who's grown up with gaming being embedded in my life. And I look at the other side of my parents who, grew up before this thing was really super popular. And it's like, okay, you had arcades back in the day, but it was something you did like as kids. And, most people, go to the movies or go watch TV. And then that's kind of what you do, right? But I look at how much it's progressed, and it's like, as we have AAA actors and actresses, right, being casted in games right now. And that in itself, is really amazing to see. And I think that, it's also appealing for people who are movie buffs, who are fans of these actors and actresses, to sit here and experience the games too. And I think that we all need to abandon, and this is more of a little gripe I have with the gaming community. It's very competitive, everyone's just at each other's throats. And if you don't prove yourself, then you're worthless, in this type of community. And it's one of the most, it's one of the most, I'm trying to say this like in a nice way, right? And I don't mean to make it sound so terrible, because there's good people in this community, right? Good-hearted people who love games, who want to share that passion with others, and who don't mean to judge or harm other people who maybe don't necessarily like those type of games. They're just sit here to enjoy themselves and have a good time, right? But we gotta stop. Kicking people out and I guess judging people and just being rude and bullish to people who are not part of this community, or people who are part of this community but in a casual way. I don't expect everyone in my life to know as much about gaming as I do, and I have a lot of friends of mine in particular who don't love games as much as I do, right? But they enjoy them from time to time. But a lot of people respect my opinion because of how much I am passionate about gaming and this medium, right? But I try to do my best to sit there and not judge, because gaming needs to be accessible for a lot of people in order for it to be more accepted. And if I sat there and all I did was like, well, aren't you reading up about this, or dude, what are you talking about? Like why would you play that? If I start being very judgmental about the experiences that these people like to play, about how much time they put into the game, about all the complaints that they had surrounding the game, then I think in a way I'm discouraging them from ever getting more involved with gaming, And I was friends with people who were very much like that, friends with people here on YouTube, who it was like, you have to prove yourself, you're nobody. And I don't know if it's a maturity thing that I just look at it differently now, or me just disconnecting from that group overall, just kind of changed my whole mindset on it, but that to me is quite ridiculous. Gaming is something that we all want collectively as a community to be accepted by everyone, right? We want people to respect gaming. We want people to enjoy gaming with us and be as passionate about it as we do. But at the same time, we can't sit there and also be, harsh for people who aren't as involved. And we have to be there and we have to be more accepting of others, who want to jump into games. And sometimes that does mean a very easy difficulty. Sometimes that does mean something like, telling someone, hey, thanks for playing, even if they ruin the score for your team in the multiplayer match or whatever the case may be, right? We have to collectively sit there and encourage people. And I feel like we're so far away from doing that in the gaming community that it's the core reason why people don't feel as accepted. New people don't feel as welcomed or accepted when they want to enjoy gaming, and why it's viewed still as something childish and people just don't understand. It's just something that I think we have to collectively come together and really promote. Is just positivity and being more open and welcome to people who aren't necessarily involved in this medium. And if the typical consequence of that is, hey, there's a very easy casualized difficulty, if you want to call it that, in some games, fine. I am all for that, except when it comes to destroying the game's identity. In the case of something like Sekiro or the From Software games, where the difficulty is part of the experience and it is part of what gives the game its identity, or just do something like what Alien Isolation did, where it's like, oh, the game is meant to be experienced this way, but you do have options to make it more accessible to people who aren't necessarily good at games. That's also fine too, I guess. So let me know what you guys think. I'm really curious to hear your thoughts on this, because I know it's been discussed earlier on with Sekiro, but now that it's sort of brought up again with Death Stranding and that difficulty, just curious to know what you guys think. All right, have a great one, and I'll talk to you later.